Hello, we are live. I am Raya Gonzalez, and I'm super excited today to have the Successful as Fuck show. I'm here with Micha Goebig, and we are going to dive in to Micha's story and just explore what success means in her story. Thank you, Micha, for being with us today.
Totally. Thanks for having me, Raya.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and how you serve people to start?
Mhm. My name is Micha Goebig. My company is Goebig Coaching and Communications, actually. I do have a 20-year background in corporate communications. I still have a boutique agency that serves the German luxury car industry. For myself, I mostly work with women in male-dominated industries, coming from the car background. And I coach them, I give workshops, I give talks about how to build confidence to self-advocate, and especially in facing new situations, new challenges, as we all do all the time now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we talk about success on this show and we talk about how it changes over time. And so, if you were to rewind all the way back to early adulthood, what would you say in that time in your life when you were like looking forward with all this hope and, and everything? What did success look like for you in early adulthood?
Very stereotypical, right? I mean, I come from a family where people are very successful, very accomplished by the standard definition of success. And so early adulthood, let's say I was in college, uh, it was always, there was never a question that I would go to grad school. That wasn't even discussed. Of course, I would go to grad school. It was only like, would it only be a master's or would it be a PhD?
Mm.
That was the only consideration. What would it be? I felt I was a rebel already by striving to be a professor, a literature professor or writer. But so that was like the rebellious definition of success I had, that I could be maybe a professor instead of a lawyer or a
Right.
doctor, something like that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think
Hmm.
that's very common for many of us who, although mine was very modest, I thought, I always tell this story because it's really funny. I thought I was going to be a physical therapist
Hmm.
because in on 1993 I took a career analysis, and that was one of the things on there, and it said you could make $40,000. And I was like, that's so much money. Oh my
Yeah,
god,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
totally gonna be a physical therapist.
yeah.
Newsflash, people, not a physical therapist. So, yeah, it's just kind of funny how those types of things come around. And then, did you feel a lot of pressure? I mean, like you say that you were a rebel because you thought that you wanted to be a professor. Did you tell your family that you wanted to do that?
Oh yeah. I mean, so I graduated from high school in 1990. And at that time, there were like two or three private universities in Germany. That was all. They were all business schools. They are still around. And I applied and went to do their tests and whatever, and got into the first one without any additional requirements. Just like, okay, you're full in, no pre classes. So everybody was like, great. And I got that letter, and I'm like, I'm not going.
Yeah.
I'm not going. I'm going to study literature and history and communication. And that was not super well received um, in a family who mostly have law school degrees,
Right.
but they are also entrepreneurs. I mean, but they were okay. They just let me go for it. But that's that stigma that comes with how families define success versus
Yes.
you are the creative one,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. I think
That that was kind of.
we've had a couple other guests too who've said that the family dynamic and the family culture, like either culture,
Mhm.
like culturally because of the country that you grew up in, but on top of that, the family dynamic is such that it causes so much pressure to be in a specific line of industry, that there's this weird feeling if you have a different feeling for yourself, if you have a different desire, and you feel a little bit like you're letting them down or you're rebelling, or that you have to excuse yourself for having this other desire, for
Mhm.
what success looks like for you.
Absolutely. I mean, and I was born and raised in Germany, so that is definitely, to a certain extent, also a cultural issue because there is like this. It's not a thing to have less of an academic degree than your parents.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not a thing. I mean, as far as I don't know, maybe it is now, but it wasn't. Not that I was aware of that. That was just not something anybody considered. You do
Right,
at least what your parents do, probably more.
right. Oh God.
Yeah.
What a pressure that must be, you know what I mean? Like, if I mean, I guess you accept that it's part of society, but then there's also this pressure to conform to that
Mhm.
when inside you're being told that there's something different that is also success for you.
That's
Um,
how you can feel like a rebel when you want to be a literature professor. That's
yes,
the only, yeah.
I know.
This is very ridiculous, right?
Oh my God. Well, fast forward a little bit. Tell me a little bit how you got into communications and developing your agency. And then we'll touch on like how you go into life coaching and into coaching women in these male dominated careers, because that's quite the jump too. Like, so going
Mhm.
from professor to, communications, and then going into life coaching in addition to that, that's a really interesting journey. So I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so first off, I started out like the way it was kind of supposed to go. I had a master's. I applied and got a teaching position at a US college, first out of grad school. So that was all still on track. And then I came back and had worked for 2 years and wanted to get back into a PhD program. And that just for the life of me could not get myself to the archives. I mean, it was just like I'm a people person, so
Right.
archives is not my thing. So uh, add to that a really toxic environment around one of the TAs, and one thing adds to the next, and eventually I dropped out.
Yeah.
So that was something I would have never expected myself to ever do, dropping out of something. And I think if my dad hadn't died, I would not have dared dropping out. That would have been too much for me to process, to tell him that I dropped out of
Right.
my PhD program. Um, then what I did was actually really taking myself back and saying, okay, uh, I had taught English at the point, um, because there weren't that many people who are fully bilingual in Germany. Everybody thinks their English is great, but there's very few people who are fully bilingual. So, and being able to write in a different language, that was not that common. So somehow from teaching English as a foreign language, I got into somehow teaching translation. I
Mm.
still don't know why I said yes to that, but I did. And then I told that to a friend of mine, and he said, "Oh, speaking of which, now that you teach translation, we are looking for someone to translate," and that was for one of the big German car makers, to translate our in-house TV station, the stuff. And I don't really like traditional translators for that because it's editorial content that needs to
Right.
be jazzed up. That's different. And so that's how I started that. I just tend to say yes
Yeah,
first and then
I love
figure it
that.
out. And the agency built from there. It's still up and running with an office manager in the UK, team in UK and Germany, um, because now I have 20 years of experience
Right.
with their language and everything. But for me, I had reached the point that was even like 10 years ago or something. I had reached the point where I felt I had done everything.
Yeah.
I had At that point, I had done speeches for like 4 CEOs of the same car maker in a row. There was no excitement to be had anymore. And so I had a coach back then. don't ask me how in Germany I came up with the idea of hiring a coach. That is still rather uncommon.
Yeah.
And but I did. And she said, you have taught so many workshops and you work with so many people one on one. Like uh, I prepared C-suite people for their calls with financial analysts in English or with journalists, that type of thing. And she's like, how about you just do a coaching training at that? And I'm like, okay. And I trained with a woman who was one of the early coaches in Germany, and she used to be a, the first C-suite woman for an American company in Germany. Of course, she was the HR director.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, and she had gotten into coaching relatively early. And so I trained with her academy and started relatively traditionally. And when I moved to the US, I got struck down by imposter syndrome and felt like I
Oh
can't
yeah.
coach here. It's like, what do I have to tell Americans and all these? And I have never worked for one of those tech companies or anything. And so it took me a couple of years of not coaching uh, or talking about these issues to see that actually I'm in a very unique spot with that background in a very male dominated industry. And now being in Seattle and seeing
Yes.
women in tech struggling with the same topics we've
Yes.
we've been discussing for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, I don't know. And those companies in the automotive world needing to be and wanting to be like tech companies.
Yes.
And so it's a very unique spot, and that's a new challenge.
Yeah, it reminds me of there's a book, I really love Mel Robbins,
Mhm.
and she has a book called Work It Out, I think it's called, but it's all about women empowerment in the workplace. And she talks about how in meetings, you should never take notes. And I thought, like, when she said that, I was like, what is she talking about? Because I'm a note taker. And she's
Mhm.
like, no, because where is your head when you're taking notes? It's down and you're
Yep.
writing notes. And she says, where are the guys' heads? They're on the
Yep.
speaker, and so then they jump in and they give their, 2 cents. And she says, no, 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 no notes. And she goes, even if all you say is, good point, John,
Mhm.
make your
Always say
voice heard.
something.
Yeah, say something, but no notes, eyes on the speaker, make eye contact, and claim your place at the table.
Yep.
Because otherwise you're abdicating your place at the table and you're saying, I'm the secretary.
Mhm.
I take notes.
That's such a tricky thing, right? Especially if you're the only woman in the room.
Yes.
And sticking with that example, if you're taking notes, it's so quick for someone to say, "Could you distribute that to everybody?"
Yes.
That's so
Yeah.
easy, right? Yeah. So I
Right.
like that. I like that. Never take notes.
I know it's a fantastic book. I mean, there's lots
Mhm.
of like good gems in there, but it's all in alignment with like what you're saying and what you're doing and how you're empowering women because we don't even realize the ways that we give up our place at the table.
Mhm.
We don't even like something as simple as that. We think we're doing it for ourselves to, enrich our own knowledge for later, but we are actually not using our voice, and by not using our voice, we don't exist. We're
Yeah.
invisible. And
Exactly.
in line with success, how in the world can you be successful and feel successful if you're telling yourself subconsciously, I am invisible.
Yep.
My words don't count. I have nothing to contribute to this conversation. Even if you don't like know that's what you're saying, that's what you're doing. You're
Yep.
telling yourself that you have nothing to offer when that's not true. Again, even if it's just awesome point, John, or have you ever thought of blah, blah, blah? Like just
Mhm.
agree, like just say something, anything, but just put your voice into the conversation so that people's eyes turn to you and they're like, oh, Mika's here. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Maya's
And
here.
it's also this thing, right, where you make it a self-fulfilling prophecy the moment you don't speak up because you're maybe also either subconsciously or because you think, do I really deserve that spot at the table? And you don't
Yes.
speak up, And then someone says, she's always there, but she's quiet. Do we really need her in this
100%.
route, right? Even that.
100%.
So then,
Yes. And I think we do this even in, like, let's just say, and I think this is totally true as well. Entrepreneurship is also male dominated,
right,
and
right.
so as an entrepreneur, I mean, maybe I'm being like sexist the other way. I don't think so though, but
Who
like
cares? No, we cannot be sexist because it's a man's world.
right, exactly. But I mean, I don't think that men suffer from imposter syndrome. I think they're like, fuck it. I'm just gonna like go out there and I'm gonna do me. And if I fail, I'll do the next thing. We're like, oh, I wonder if anyone is gonna want what I have. Oh, I
Hmm.
wonder if this is gonna work. Oh, I wonder if I'm gonna fail. And it's gonna be so embarrassing. I mean, like I've had all these thoughts. Like I've put myself so far out there as
Hmm.
one thing, and I feel like I don't have permission to reinvent myself because I have established myself as one thing. And that is such a like chick thing to do. Like I just don't
Totally.
think dudes do that. Like they don't go out there and say like, "Oh, well, I'm the virtual assistant matchmaker and I can't possibly want to do anything else because I've already told people I'm this." Bullshit.
Yeah. And I mean, the data is very clear. A straight white dude will have a way easier time getting funding after he bombed with a startup than a
Yes.
female founder with a success record.
Right.
It's still that way. And when I think about myself, I'm totally with you on that one. Uh, I remember when I moved to the US, because that's also like there's also this thing about humbleness,
Yes.
and of course I'm more on the loud side anyway. So that was something when I moved here, and people asked me what I did, and I said, "Oh, I'm a translator." And my husband was like, "You are not a translator. You are an entrepreneur. You work for
Yeah. You
C-suite
have a
people
boutique
in
agency. Yeah.
yeah, in I mean global companies." And I'm like, "Yeah, I guess." And I did this thing. It took me years.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
hard. Like I will tell people like and I'm telling myself every time I do this, I'll say like, "Oh, I'm a badass." Like I'll just say
Hmm.
it, like if they're like, "Oh, like tell me about yourself." I'm like, "I'm a badass," like or whatever. Or I like to if people like ask me in different scenarios, I'll be like, "Oh, my name is Raya motherfucking Gonzalez." Like
Yeah.
and I'll
Yeah.
like claim that over myself
Hmm.
even though most of the time I don't feel that way about myself. And because we have to tell ourselves that because no one's going to step up and make us
Yeah.
feel worthy. We have to feel worthy for ourselves. We have to feel enough for ourselves because the external validation of our family, of our culture, of the career, like at the end of the day, all these things are just roles and titles. They're not who
Right.
we really are.
Right.
They don't really define our success.
They
You know
can
what
all
I
go away.
Yeah, you can reinvent yourself 800 times, but you are the person who's bold enough to try.
Right. I am totally with you on that one. And sometimes people ask me, isn't that fake it till you make it? When you call yourself like, I don't know, I'm a rock star. And I'm like, no, no, this is you managing your brain. This
Yes.
is you working on yourself.
Yes.
Because if you don't believe it, it is very unlikely that others will believe it for the long term. I mean,
Yes.
we've all met people who say, "Oh, this was amazing. You could do this." But if you don't follow up and say, "I'm
Yep.
pretty amazing that way," if you
Yep.
don't follow up on that, that person will not turn into a mentor or a sponsor or a client, whatever. Yeah, because that has to be reflected back.
I think there's so much language around this. So when I say I'm a badass, in the moment I say it, I feel it.
Hmm.
Like, I feel it. I'm at the point in the beginning, fake it till you make it, maybe a little bit or whatever. Like, I didn't necessarily feel it in that moment. I was like being ha ha ha, like I'm a badass, ha ha ha. Now I'm like, I'm a badass. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
maybe 2 seconds later, I don't feel that way. But in that moment, I embrace it and I feel it. And so it is that managing of that internal conversation.
Yeah.
And then we have to manage ourselves in our negative conversation too. And this was on a TikTok, and there is a creator named Elise Myers, and she talked about an instance where somebody was horrible to her in a professional setting. And they like handed her a credit card and said, "You're going to do this." And she pushed it back and she goes, "Actually, I do not receive that." And she walked away. She said,
Wow.
"Now I tell myself
Mm-hmm.
when I have a thought, I say out loud, actually, I do not receive that." She
Mm-hmm.
said there's something about the act
Yeah.
of saying it out loud that the brain is like, oh, we don't receive that. Okay. We don't. Okay. All right. What other thoughts do we have? You know what I mean? Like, and so I think we need to do that more. And it's something that's so simple, but it's also so powerful because it's more than an affirmation. Like,
Yeah.
we could affirmation ourselves to death, which I think there's power in affirmations. I think that it is a good thing, but we also have to deaffirm things, like
Unlearn.
or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the word is, like just say no.
Yep.
Like, no, actually, that is fucking bullshit. Knock it
Yep.
off. Because we tell ourselves things that are so awful. We would never speak to somebody else that way.
Yep.
And
That's
we
so
are
true.
powerful. And so because we are powerful, we are putting our heads down in a meeting, but in our own mind, like we're saying, I don't have room at this table. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have room at my own I made this goddamn table. I
Yep.
made this table. I have the only chair at this table, but I don't have the worth to sit in this only chair at my own goddamn table. And oh, it
Yeah.
makes me crazy.
It makes me angry, and it frustrates me, and it makes me sad because I see so many super talented, gifted women with amazing, I mean, with enough education to sustain half a department. Uh, and and they feel like I'm not ready to do the next step, and or yeah, I'm not good enough to be in that position, and all these things. And it's so frustrating because a lot of it is just still social cultural um conditioning,
Yeah.
especially this thing with being humble.
Yes.
That
I
that
think
gets on
there's
my nerves so much. That
humility.
humble
Yeah.
thing. I mean, just like, yeah, drives me crazy. Uh,
Humility is great and fine in everything in certain situations. Like it's no one really wants to be around some arrogant, braggadocious asshole. Like that's good to
exactly.
be humble there. But when you're speaking about your accomplishments and who you are,
It's not
like
arrogance.
own it and say like, I'm Raya motherfucking Gonzalez. Like, of course I would do that. Like, thank you. That's so true. Like, I have
Yeah,
worked really hard
yeah,
to accomplish that, and I really appreciate you noticing that. Like, but we have such a hard time embracing the receiving of anything, the receiving of help, the
right.
receiving of compliments, the receiving of anything, because we have to be very independent and we have to do it on our own, and we have to be humble, and we can't possibly achieve these things because other people say so. And
Yep,
that's the whole like premise of the book is fuck other people. What do you say? What do you say is success?
yeah,
what
yeah,
what does it say in your heart, and how does that change for you, and reassess over and over again, because it's going to change. In the moment that you were seeking education as a professor, being a professor, I can imagine, was success. That was
sure.
success. When as you moved into your boutique agency, having that have its own global headquarters in the UK and Germany, that's success. And now helping women, I can only imagine, in this very tech centered, very male dominated area, like the empowerment that you're able to help them accomplish, I can imagine that that feels like a high, like very successful for you. But like, can you speak to me about that journey for you? Because again, it's like it changes as you move through life, you know?
Yep. It does. It does. And for me also that cultural change to go from Germany to the US and to a place like Seattle. That's also, I mean, uh, that again, even coming from a large city in Germany, uh, it's just much more future oriented, right?
Right.
So there are a couple of things that I feel America as a whole has that Europe doesn't have, that clean slate, that
Mm,
clean slate thing. It's something I felt the very first time I moved to the US in the 90s. And then again, America allows you to reinvent yourself.
mhm.
You're suddenly not what the four generations before you are.
Right.
So that is something I find, especially with European immigrants to the US, that is something we are all very grateful for, because that's usually, as privileged as we are, being immigrants from Europe, and we could go home again, but that's usually what appeals to Europeans, that shedding part of the culture,
Yeah.
reinventing yourself. That's what I feel, especially for women, that can be very liberating. I found it very liberating. And I still got stuck when I uh, put my two businesses in one company, and then I was like, "Am I calling myself a CEO?" And of course, immediately someone from Germany said, "You, oh, you're doing that American bullshit now. This grand title thing." And I'm like, "Yes, yes, I'm doing that because." Quite honestly, this is what I am an entrepreneur. This is my company. There's a team of almost 10 people by now. Of course, I'm a CEO.
Yes.
I don't need to have a brick and mortar building to be a CEO. I don't need 1,000 people. There's nothing of that.
Right. Yeah.
And
We have to claim it for
uh,
ourselves.
we have to claim it. And it still sometimes feels uncomfortable, but you just go on claiming it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. When you look forward, like if you were to look 15, 20 years forward and then to look backward and say what you accomplished in between now and 20 years from now, what would it feel like to be successful? Like in the later version of yourself, if you were like what you had accomplished felt good as though it was successful, what do you think that would be?
So for me nowadays, success has a couple of different components. For me, a very important one is impact. So that would probably be the top metric when we go forward, to say, uh, did I have an impact that did I really empower women, or on which scale did I do it one on one, or did I do it on a larger scale? Either one is fine. Either, I
Mhm.
think that's something I will figure out along the way. But impact is an important one for me personally. Fun. I'm an
Yes.
Enneagram 7. So it
Yes.
all has to be always fun and exciting. And that is something that took me super long to own. That's again not something that you can that is fostered in my cult in the culture I come from, that you make your decisions based on how much fun they are.
Right.
Um, and I enjoy that privilege, that I say, okay, I still have to do things that are not fun,
Of course. Yeah.
but having that as kind of a guideline,
Yeah.
impact and fun, and of course values. So I think at this point, the success metric of just having my little my little share in making the society fairer and better and more inclusive, usually with my focus probably on the women's side.
Right.
uh that's how I would measure my success now or going forward.
I love that. I love that. As you know, like what I do in my business is very women centric and very women
Right.
empowering, and so that's
Right.
definitely something that is core to my desires, is making an impact here and in the Philippines for women in the
Right.
Philippines. And here is funny because here is now the US, Canada, UK, Germany, Netherlands. Like, I mean, the things are just like growing and stretching into this global thing because we are, the world is flat at this point. You know what I mean? Like, we're
It
really
is true.
able
Yeah.
to totally touch lives wherever we go. And I think that's a fantastic metric of success is how can we bring good into the world, especially for women, just period. Like, there's
Right.
no disclaimer or anything after that.
Not, no, yeah, not for me either. Because when people say, "Well, why are you helping women in particular?" I'm like, of course. Let's say what I teach about the 5 steps to train confidence. Of course, men can benefit from that too. But quite honestly, straight white guys had thousands of years to make this world a good place, and I don't know if they did such a great job. So let's try to hand it over to other people.
Agreed.
Uh,
Agreed.
that
Absolutely.
is, for me, it's as simple as that. It's just a feminist decision right now. And it's
I
kind
think
of funny because you know what I wrote my master's thesis on back then when I still thought I would be a literature professor? On the matriarchy.
wow.
I worked on Troy, and the destruction of Troy, basically through the Greek patriarchy.
Wow. That
So
was some
that's us.
foreshadowing there. Well, Micha, I always end the show with the same question. And I love this question because I get so many answers that are varied. And I've done this since the beginning of my podcast. But what would you say is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given? And it could be something that you read or something told to you, something you tell to yourself or a mantra, but just something that really sticks with you and helps you get through whatever and encourages you and fires you up.
I would really, what really sticks with me and has since I heard it for the first time, that was actually in my coaching training when my first coach, when she said, people don't do things to hurt you. They just do whatever is best for them in this situation
Mm,
because they are not even thinking about you. They are thinking about themselves.
right. So
I guess
true.
that ties in again with the book you quoted about, yeah, fuck what others think, because they're not thinking about you anyway.
Right. They're not.
So it's
They've
it's
got
not
their
it's
eyes on the
not
speaker.
mean.
Yeah.
It's not mean. It's just they do what works for them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Ooh, I like that one a lot. Because it's true. And we
Mm,
can get caught in the victim cycle or we can do something
yeah,
about it, you know?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So good. So good. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. We've linked all of Micha's contact information in the show notes. I encourage you to reach out to her, especially if you are a woman in a male dominated industry. Get some coaching. Coaching is awesome. It helps you just lift you up and just empower you to be the best version of who you are. So please reach out to Micha. Thank you, Micha, for being a guest on our show. Um, for those who haven't heard the news, you'll hear it incessantly, but the pre-sale of my book goes live on the 31st. Please buy a book. Please share information about it. This book is important. It is going to touch lives and help people take ownership of their own unconventional success and feel enough. And that's the most important thing. So we thank you for joining us, and we'll catch you on the flip flop. Thank you.